Good evening. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another edition of Talking Point. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. As Israel's ongoing genocide occurs in Gaza, and as the global Sumud flotilla makes its way to Gaza to deliver the necessary aid to break the illegal Israeli siege, the political aspect of Palestine is still on the discussion. This month, the UN General Assembly will host a meeting with many European nations, the latest being Belgium, to recognize Palestine as a state. Of course, this has brought the fury of Benjamin Netanyahu and his government, as they have continuously said that recognizing a Palestine state would, quote unquote, equating it to terrorism. My guest today is the Director of the European Affairs Department, of course, acts as the Palestine ambassador to the European Union. It is none other than Ambassador Adel Atieh. Ambassador, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and shukran so much for joining us today.
Alaikum assalam, and my greetings to you, to the population, the people of South Africa, its government and the state.
Now, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. Ambassador, I think I want to start off with the decision last week by Marco Rubio to suspend the visas for the Palestinian delegation that was supposed to go ahead and attend that UN General Assembly. Just your reaction to it.
I would not like to be at his place, to be in the wrong side of history. I don't like to be at his place to stand with the country that is committing a genocide. This is a wrong decision. It violates the agreement between the United Nations and the government of the United States. Our visa application is to attend the meeting organized at the headquarters of the United Nations, not to the United States. But he shows with this decision that he stands with the country again that is committing a genocide. And this is part of the attempt of both the United States and Israel to ruin the credibility of international law and to work against this important conference that will raise the voices of many countries that will join the recognition of the state of Palestine.
Ambassador, in the statement, it says, quote unquote, the Trump administration has been clear it is in our national security interest to hold the PLO and, of course, the Palestine Authority accountable for not complying with their commitments and for undermining the prospects of peace. But this is what the actual General Assembly Summit is meant to be. It's meant to be finding a peaceful solution. This statement in itself, does it not speak to a complete disregard to what is supposed to be happening at the US General Assembly?
I don't know if joining meetings at the United Nations is against peace and against the national interests of the United States. And I don't know if calling to international justice and legal institutions like the International Justice Court or the International Criminal Court is against the international law. I think what the United States is doing is against international law, and again, it violates the agreement between the United Nations and the United States. I mean, we have spent long time negotiating with Israel, and Israel is obviously not interested at all with the concept of two-state solution. And not only that it is not interested with this concept, with the notion of a two-state solution, it is doing its best to kill the prospect of a peace solution with us. And therefore, I think that what the United States is doing is wrong. It's not in the national interest, in the best interest of the United States. And this is a wrong decision that we hope that the United States will reconsider this decision and allow to our delegation at the highest level to attend this important meeting.
You mentioned, or you would hope that the United States would overturn its decision. It's a very different administration as to the one maybe of Barack Obama or Joe Biden? Because when we look at Donald Trump, it's quite clear he has this unhindering support for Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. And when you see the way Steve Witkoff, the envoy to Donald Trump in the Middle East, conducts a lot of his work, many critics, many analysts have said that this is biased towards Israel. Surely when you look at it from that perspective, Ambassador, it really does make negotiating peace very difficult.
Yeah, look, again, it's unfortunate that this administration stands with this messianic government in Israel, especially that it is obvious that Israel is working against the two-state solution. And by the way, the United States itself is committed. We have official communications. We have official papers exchanged between us and between the United States, where the United States confirms its support, its engagement for the two-state solution. But this position obviously goes against all those commitments, all those promises to help to push forward for the two-state solution. And again, it comes in a time when Netanyahu is doing his best to undermine the implementation of the two-state solution. Netanyahu does not miss one single opportunity to speak against the prospect of a peace deal with the Palestinians. At the contrary, he's referring to the greater Israel, and not only to occupy the Palestinian territories, but to stretch the borders of Israel to a larger territories in the Middle East. And this is against the national interests of the United States to continue standing with this extremist government that not only it is denying our right to self-determination, but it is working on a daily basis to build settlements, to push more settlers in the occupied territory, and to undermine the prospect of a peaceful solution, which is in the best interest of the Israelis and the Palestinians alike.
Yeah, I'm going to touch, obviously, in the following segments to what is happening currently in the occupied West Bank, where you are right now, especially in Ramallah. Ambassador, when you listen to the rhetoric of former prime ministers also, they're not really talking out on trying to find not just a peace deal, but also this very talk of a two-state solution. When you listen to Naftali Bennett or Ehud Olmert, all it is basically get the captives out from Gaza, and that's about it, holding Netanyahu accountable. This is, of course, seemingly a more internal scenario that we are seeing within Israel. Should there be more calls from Israeli politicians to push for this two-state solution, or are we, just like the likes of Smotrich, the likes of Ben-Gvir, the likes of Vez, all they want is the interests of Israel to be put above everyone else, and it doesn't matter if it comes at the expense of more settlements and the ethnic cleansing, not just in Gaza, but also with the occupied West Bank?
What Netanyahu is doing is contrary to the long-term best interests of Israel and of the Israelis. What he is interested in today is to keep his political life, to survive his political career by expanding those settlements, by calling for more extremist positions by his government. And by the way, those moderate voices, critics that are coming from the Israeli society, of course, we should encourage them. But unfortunately, they are not in a position to change the course of event on the ground. What Netanyahu is doing in the West Bank and in Gaza, it is part of a global strategy, again, to undermine the prospect of a two-state solution. Since the beginning, we said, as Palestinian diplomats, we try to draw the attention of the international community that Israel policies in Gaza and in the West Bank are part of a global strategy that aims to create new political facts in the ground to make the two-state solution impossible. Netanyahu is trying to mix the cards in order to make this solution far away. The settlement construction and the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank and settlement expansion, again, is part of a global war against the three pillars of an independent state of Palestine. To create and to maintain a state, a country, you need a territory, you need a population, and you need a government. If you look to what is happening in Gaza and in the West Bank, this is part of a global war against the geography of the state of Palestine. The voices that are advocating for the reoccupation of Gaza, similarly, the voices that are pushing for the reoccupation and annexation of the entire West Bank, this is obviously a war against the geography. He wanted to dismantle the geographic, the material element of the state of Palestine. Second, it is a war against the demography, the second pillar of an independent state. The war of genocide, the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank are obviously the most obvious examples of this war against the Palestinian demography. And the repeated calls by the Messianic ministers in his government to ethnically cleanse Gaza, to kick out the entire population of Gaza, again, is part of this war. Three, it is also a war against the existence of the Palestinian Authority. The financial starvation that they are doing against the Palestinian Authority, the withhold of our tax money, which deprive the Palestinian Authority from the financial means to continue delivering services to the Palestinian population, is part of this global war. So it is obvious what Netanyahu wants today. It is obvious what his government is seeking to achieve today, and therefore those countries who continue pushing, who continue supporting the government of the state of Palestine, I think that they are doing wrong, and they are destroying, they are contributing to dismantling the concept of a two-state solution.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Ambassador Adel Atieh. We're going to be discussing the genocide in Gaza. Just on Monday, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, a unanimous vote declaring what is happening in Gaza as a genocide, confirming what we already knew 1.5 years ago. This conversation continues after the break. Welcome back to Talking Point. My guest is Ambassador Adel Atieh, the Director of European Affairs Department for the State of Palestine. Ambassador, the decision or the report from the International Association of Genocide Scholars, 86% unanimous vote saying that what is happening in Gaza is a genocide. I guess both you and I and anyone who had been following the brutality there would probably have known that this is a genocide, maybe not even 1.5 years ago, but since the start of October the 7th. How important is this report given who the IAGS is?
Well, it is not the first report, but it confirms what has been said by many scholars around the world and by the United Nations institutions. And by the way, the latest report comes from an Israeli human rights NGO, which is B'Tselem, which also confirms that what Israel is doing in Gaza is part of a war of genocide. And it also confirms what South Africa has said 20 months ago regarding the situation in Gaza. And obviously, Israel is committing. There is no debate. There is no doubt about it. There is almost a consensus among intellectuals, among scholars, and even among Israeli intellectual and philosophers that what Israel is doing there is part of a war of genocide, starving people to death, bombing hospitals, destroying humanitarian aid convoys, cutting water, electricity, no medicine, no health treatment, And obviously, this is part of a war of genocide as it was defined by the International Convention and the Prevention of Genocide. So we are behind the debate on whether Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza or not, because it is confirmed by Israel acts and actions. And moreover, it is confirmed by the Israeli official statements. Many of them were calling to drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza. Many of them were calling to burn Gaza, to starve the population in Gaza, and to ethnically cleansing the population of Gaza. All those concepts, all those policies that are practiced by Israel today in Gaza do not leave any doubt that Israel is in a situation where it is committing a genocide in Gaza.
Ambassador, earlier this week, Israeli Channel 13 leaked a report saying that there was no decision to go ahead and create a ceasefire when, of course, Hamas had agreed to many of the proposals for the ceasefire and, of course, sent it through to the Qatari mediators. It was quite clear that when you look at the report from Channel 13 from Israel, they do not want to agree to a ceasefire. Not only do they not want to agree to the ceasefire, but they want to continue this occupation of Gaza City. We see the bombing occurring still within that part of the enclave, but this ground offensive that Netanyahu wants to conduct. Already then, isn't it, Ambassador? It's quite clear. You've mentioned it, of course, in the first segment. Israel has no intention of wanting to end this genocide. They want to take it to a level where the ethnic cleansing that they continue to speak about becomes a reality for them.
This is an old idea. When Israel was created in 1948, the slogan was a land for people and a land without people for a people without a land. And Netanyahu took this opportunity to declare a total war against the prospect of a two-state solution. As I mentioned, it is a war against geography, demography, and against the Palestinian Authority. And back to the ceasefire, obviously the mediators were, since the first day of the war, they were proposing a comprehensive agreement for a ceasefire to release the entire number of Israeli kept in Gaza. But Netanyahu was rejecting all those propositions since the beginning. And now he is advocating and pushing for a comprehensive agreement for a ceasefire. But let's remember that on the 15th of January, a ceasefire agreement was reached between Israel and Hamas. That ceasefire agreement was based on including 3 phases. The first phase was supposed to start on March the 2nd. To allow the release of a maximum number of hostages. Let's remember that the one who broke the ceasefire was Netanyahu. He concluded the first phase of this fire, and he refused to start the negotiations for the second and for the third phase of this fire. Then he is the one who is responsible for the absence of a comprehensive agreement or a comprehensive ceasefire today, because again, it is for his political survival, and second, because he wants to run away from any commitments to the two-state solution. His intention is to extend the war and to achieve his objective to ethnically cleansing the Palestinians and to eliminate any prospect for a two-state solution. And therefore, I'm not surprised that he is rejecting all the offers that have been done by Egypt and by Qatar, including the last offer by the mediators.
And that's the thing, Ambassador, isn't it? When you listen to Matthew Miller, who was a State Department spokesperson during the Biden administration, he mentioned that within the second week of the genocide, Hamas had created, of course, a solution to end it in terms of a ceasefire. Immediately then, Benjamin Netanyahu was not interested at all. And this brings it again with regards to the genuine aspect of Israel, which is, of course, a lack thereof, that there is no intention from them to go ahead and wanting to negotiate any sort of peace, maybe what we saw in 2017 or 2014 before, where attacks on Gaza ended within a 2 or 3 week period. We are now in the 22nd or the 23rd month, I beg your pardon, of this genocide. And it's quite clear when you see the political issues that Benjamin Netanyahu faces, this was a true distraction. And close to 64,000 innocent lives have been taken in the process.
Well, again, it's obvious that Netanyahu is not interested at all in a ceasefire. And by the way, he is in a total disagreement today with the officials of his army, because he failed to achieve the military objectives of this war and the political objectives of this war. And also he failed to release any hostages by the fighting. All hostages that have been released were released within the framework of two agreements on a ceasefire with Hamas. Again, we need to understand that this government is a messianic government. When Mr. Netanyahu is referring on a daily basis to the greater Israel, when Smotrich is referring to Israel, which goes from Egypt to Iraq. And I think it is hard to negotiate with those people on a ceasefire, because they see on this war of genocide as an opportunity to create the greater Israel that they are referring to. And therefore, it is difficult for them today to accept any agreement on a ceasefire, because the minute that we are reaching a ceasefire agreement, Netanyahu will face a persecution for corruption in Israel, and then the dream about the greater Israel will fail, because the minute there is a ceasefire, obviously we have to start talking about the day after arrangement, the arrangements in Gaza and in the West Bank. And with an increasing pressure from the international community, Israel will face the reality that it should start negotiating with the Palestinians for the implementation of the two-state solution. But as long as this war is going on, Netanyahu sees that he has no obligations to start any political process that could lead to a peace agreement with the Palestinians and to the creation of an independent state of Palestine. Let's remember that he instructed the Israeli parliament to adopt legislations against the two-state solution. There are laws in the Israeli parliament against the creation of an independent state of Palestine and against the recognition of the state of Palestine. And just a couple of weeks ago, the parliament, the Israeli parliament, adopted in the first reading legislations to extend the Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank. And just today, Smotrich had a meeting with the leaders of the settlers' movements to explain to them that Israel has the intention to annex 82% of the occupied West Bank. So if you put all those events, all those statements, all those actions, it is obvious that Netanyahu is not interested in the two-state solution. That was our message to the international community since 1993. We have started negotiating with Israel in 1993, and we've spent 23 years in empty negotiations, because Israel took the peace process as a tool to empower, to reinforce the occupation. In 1993, there was 150,000 settlers in the occupied West Bank. Today, we are talking about 700 to 800,000 settlers. So you would agree with me that Israel hijacked the peace process in order to empower and to reinforce the occupation. And nobody can be sure today that Netanyahu has the intention to withdraw from the occupied West Bank and to dismantle those settlements. And therefore, it is not strange for us as we observe Netanyahu's statements and behavior, that he is denying, he is living in a denial, that he does not want to come to the negotiation table in order not to commit himself for the two-state solution.
Ambassador,
but we hope...
I have to stop you there, because we are going to be discussing the occupied West Bank after the break. The name Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, it's quite clear they want to continue the annexation of the occupied West Bank. And where Ambassador Adel Atieh is right now in Ramallah, we've seen violence erupting there, especially from the settlers and the Israeli occupation forces. My conversation continues after this break. Welcome back to Talking Point. Now, a few weeks ago, the Israeli Knesset unanimously passed the E1 expansion plan, which would see the total annexation of many parts of the occupied West Bank. Ambassador Adel, I want to touch on that Knesset decision there. When you listen to the rhetoric, of course, from Ben Gvir and Smotrich, it's quite clear that a lot of outsiders would see the far right putting influence within the government, taking over the center or the so-called center, which is, of course, the Likud party of Benjamin Netanyahu. But here's the thing. It's quite clear that Benjamin Netanyahu himself has given this thumbs up. He's given this go-ahead for it to happen. So it would be disingenuous, I think, for everyone to say, well, it's the far right that is doing the influence. Quite frankly, it is the entire Israeli cabinet that is saying, go ahead and annex all of those lands within the occupied territory.
Unfortunately, the Israeli public opinion is under a permanent propaganda, brainwashing by this extremist government, to the point that even among the Israeli public opinion, the concept of a two-state solution is eroding. We don't have a majority of Israelis today that support, unfortunately, the two-state solution, because, again, there is a permanent, daily propaganda and brainwashing of the Israeli population. The second point that remember when this war, when Netanyahu launched this deadly war against Gaza, his argument that this war aimed at dismantling the military infrastructures in Hamas. But in the West Bank, the one who controls the West Bank is supposed to be the Palestinian Authority. We don't have a Hamas regime in the West Bank. So he can explain his deadly war of genocide in Gaza. But how can one explain what is happening in the West Bank? There is a war against, again, demography, geography, and the Palestinian Authority. And if you look to the northern part of the West Bank, the ethnic cleansing, more than 40,000 Palestinians were kicked out from their refugee camps in Jenin and in Tulkarem and in Qalqilia. And the scale of expansion of settlements and the building of a new settlements, you referred to E1. And just a couple of months ago, Israel approved the construction of 22 new settlements. So this leaves no doubt, again, that it is a war against the entire concept of a two-state solution. Israel wants to dismantle the concept of a two-state solution. It is not interested at all in the two-state solution or in any peace agreement with the Palestinian people. Otherwise, one cannot explain the situation in the West Bank. And they also released their violent settlers that are practicing terrorism against the Palestinian population on a daily basis. And this terrorist settlers terrorism is with the contribution, with the participation, and under the protection of the Israeli army. And all this matrix of measures of settlement expansion, of closures, the Palestinian cities are divided today to make a distance from Ramallah to Bethlehem. It's less than 35 kilometers. You need 5 hours, and you need to cross 5 checkpoints. Those checkpoints are on a daily basis, are closed in the morning from 7 to 9 to allow the settlers for easy access to their working places. And in the evening between 5 and 7, they are all again closed to allow the settlers easy coming back from their work. So obviously here it is a part of a global strategy again against the two-state solution, against the prospect of a two-state solution. And we hope that the new dynamic in the international community will push this extremist government first to stop the war of genocide in Gaza, the war of starvation in Gaza, and second, to resume the political process in order to end with this occupation and to create the independent state of Palestine.
Ambassador Adel, when you read the report, and I'm going to bring in the report of B'Tselem, that of course discusses settler violence, especially the murder of Oda, which we saw a few weeks ago, and it was seen on video also of an Israeli settler using a weapon to go ahead and, of course, ultimately kill him. That report highlights just part of the way Israeli settlers use violence. But the fact that they've been backed by the Israeli occupation forces and various other security personnel of Israel just shows that it's two different sorts of entities coming together to really complete this ethnic cleansing of the population of the occupied West Bank.
Well, as I mentioned, the settlers' terrorist movements and acts are always, whether with the participation of the occupation army or under the protection of the occupation army. And by the way, the settler who shooted the Palestinian in southern Hebron a couple of weeks ago, he was released the day after he was arrested. And despite the footage, despite the video that has been circulating in the social media, he was released the following day. Only 2% of cases are being investigated seriously by the Israeli authorities and the Israeli army. Only 2% of those aggressions against the Palestinians are taken seriously and investigated, and 98% of those acts of terrorists are not investigated. So those terrorists are acting in a total impunity, not only total impunity, but they are protected when the international community tries to impose, to sanction those settlers and their organizations. The state of Israel stands and defends them against any sanctions, against any repressive measures from the international community. So it is not surprising that those settlers are encouraged to continue targeting the Palestinians. And this is part of the war against the demography. Israel wants to kick out the majority of Palestinians to take the land without its population in order to create the messianic concept of the greater Israel without its Palestinian population.
Ambassador, what we have seen also in the recent weeks is many settlers occupying the Al-Aqsa compound. And what they are doing there is not just to provoke many of the Palestinian citizens, but to go ahead and lay down what they say is going to be our land, or the return of something divine, in their words. But when you see the likes of Ben Gavir joining these very same settlers, this coming from an official from an Israeli government, it's quite clear, isn't it, that they have no boundaries in terms of the expansion of what they want to do to this greater Israel project.
Yeah, remember a couple of weeks ago, Netanyahu, he declared on TV that he has a divine mission on this land, and he referred to the greater Israel, which includes not only Palestine from the river to the sea, but which includes territories between Egypt and between Iraq. He does not shy, he does not hide his objectives, and he announced it on TV screens. And today he finds allies like Smotrich and Ben Gvir within his government to support this ideology. But back to the issue of Al-Aqsa, we as Palestinian diplomats, as a Palestinian people, we are always arguing that this is not a conflict between religions. Yes. We have nothing against the Jewish people. We have nothing against Judaism. It is a conflict of law, of rights of a people under occupation who want to exercise his inalienable right to self-determination. The one who is pushing us to the ground, to the territory of a religious war, and it is very dangerous, is Netanyahu and his allies in his extremist government. Because today in Israel there are let's say, 7 million Jews in Israel. But remember, there is more than 1.2 billion Muslims around the world. Today, the conflict is between Israelis and Palestinians on the territories occupied, namely West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem. But if this conflict is transformed in a conflict between two religions, and I think they are the loser in this equation. And let's not also forget that aggressions are not only against the Muslim holy sites in Jerusalem. There is also an obvious, a clear ethnic cleansing policy against the Christian population of the old city of Jerusalem. The Israel government confiscates church properties and withdrawing the ID, the residency of many Palestinians in Jerusalem, and mainly through the Christian community, in order to create a new reality in the old city of Jerusalem within the policy of Judaization of the city. So if this policy will continue in this direction, I'm afraid that in a couple of years we will not find a single Christian or a single Muslim in the old city of Jerusalem. But again, they will lose this battle if they will transform it in a war of religion between Jews and Muslims, Jews and Christians. And this is totally, definitely not our position.
After the break, my conversation wraps up with Adel Atieh. As more and more countries say that they will recognize Palestine, how much has that changed the way the perception or narrative has been in favor of Palestine since October 2023? Do stay tuned. We'll be back after this break. Welcome back to Talking Point. Now, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez launched a scathing attack on many European leaders, calling them out on its position with regards to the genocide in Gaza. Ambassador, of course, you sit within the European Union Parliament. You have these discussions with many of the leaders within European nations. This comment from Prime Minister Sanchez, how important is it in not just holding the leaders accountable, but asking them the question, when are you going to be more vocal against Israel's aggression and genocide, not only in Gaza, but also in the occupied West Bank?
Well, there is a very wide agreed fact that without the unconditional support of many Western countries, Israel could have not proceed with the war of genocide, occupying since 58 years the Palestinian territories and denying us our fundamental right to self-determination. So, but today I have to acknowledge also that there is a shift within the political aspects in the EU and in the Western countries. There is a change in their approach dealing with the occupying power with the state of Israel. This shift is important. It is real. It is not as quick as we want it to be as Palestinians, but this does not deny the fact that there is an important change of mood in the Western world against Israel, because at the end of the day, the EU and the Western world is the victim of its own double standard policy, because we saw that the EU and the Western world standing strong in the case of Ukraine, and we saw in the other hand that there was a compromise, there was an unconditional support with the state of Israel since the beginning of this war of genocide. Now the change is real to the point that countries like Spain, like Ireland, like Slovenia took the right decision to recognize the state of Palestine, and they are urging their partners in the EU to take the same decision, because it is obvious now today that the creation of an independent state of Palestine is the only way to guarantee the security of both Israelis and Palestinians, and it is the only way for peace and stability in the Middle East. Second, it becomes increasingly obvious among diplomats in the Western world that Israel objective of this war, it is not, as Israel declared, to dismantle the military infrastructure in Gaza, but it is becoming increasingly obvious that Israel aims to dismantle, to kill the prospect of a two-state solution and to maintain this state of war not only in Palestine, but to continue its policy of destabilizing the entire Middle East. And this goes against the interests of the Western countries, especially the EU. And therefore, we can see that there is a change, a real change and of behavior toward the state of Israel. And we are expecting more countries to join Spain, more countries to join Slovenia and Ireland, and to recognize the state of Palestine. We are expecting many of those countries to make statements of recognition of the state of Palestine during the peace conference on the implementation of the two-state solution in New York.
Ambassador, it's one thing to obviously, make the recognition of Palestine. Of course, you've been hearing UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy speaking about potentially looking at sanctions. And of course, at the time, many people thought of it as just as a talk shop. We are yet to see a tangible evidence where the sanctions could occur. But of course, Slovenia have been quite hard on hitting sanctions, especially on many individuals who are settlers within the occupied West Bank. But my question to you, Ambassador, is when do we move from recognizing Palestine to saying it's time for total sanctions on Israel, given what it has been doing in Gaza and also what it is doing within the occupied West Bank?
So, but let me first start by sanctions. As I said, Israel enjoyed unconditional support from the Western world, but this is changing. And the proof that this is changing, that the EU, let me refer to the EU, for the first time in 50 years, imposed sanctions on the state of Israel. And this is a kind of break the taboo. We see statements against what is happening in Gaza. We see sanctioning settlers' movements. We see sanctioning even ministers. Nobody could have imagined that one day several European governments will impose sanctions against Israeli officials, but it is happening. We saw many European countries, they stopped the arms trade with Israel, and there are many voices pushing within the EU to suspend the EU-Israel Association Agreement. So this is regarding the sanction. So it will happen, and also because this is also a legal obligation. Just remember the International Court of Justice ruling regarding the illegality of the Israeli occupation, and this ruling comes with a measure of requirement that it asks the member states to implement, not to help, not to assess, not to recognize, and to take all necessary measures in order to put an end to the occupation. And the United Nations General Assembly resolution was referring to a period of 12 months to end this occupation. So there is a change within the international community, and I think the recognition is very important because the recognition will create a new legal reality in relations between the state that will recognize Palestine and the state that will, in its relations with Israel. Let me explain that. When it changes the legal relationship between the international community and the state of Palestine and the international community and the state of Israel, and our objective in the Palestinian diplomacy is not only to push for recognition, but we want the countries that recognize the state of Palestine to translate this recognition in their bilateral relations with Palestine and in their bilateral relations with Israel. It means that we will not be talking about occupied territories, but we will be referring to the occupied territories of the state of Palestine. And within this new legal reality, international community or states that will recognize the state of Palestine, they have new legal obligations. We will talk state to each other, and we will push them to impose even more sanctions against Israel. And those sanctions could include political, economic, or trade sanctions against Israel. And therefore, the recognition should be considered or should be looked at as an important act. It is not symbolic. It will have political and legal consequences, and we are preparing ourselves in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the State of Palestine to use those new legal tools in order to push the countries to further impose sanctions on Israel. If you look, for instance, what is happening with all those companies invested, the Norwegian companies that withdraw their investment from the Israeli companies involved in settlement businesses and in the occupation. This is an important fact because Israel cannot live without its trade relations with the Western countries. It cannot live without its cultural relations and agreement with the Western world, and it cannot live without investment, without the money that is coming from the EU and from the Western world. And therefore, I think that we can be optimistic for the days to come after the recognition of a larger member of the international community of the State of Palestine, especially EU member states, because, as I said, those are political, legal obligations. And we always refer in our discussions with the European diplomats to the International Criminal Court order and to the International Justice Court ruling regarding the occupation. And it is their legal obligation. They cannot continue supporting, they cannot continue closing their eyes to a war of genocide. And otherwise, they will be accused of complicity with the war of genocide in Gaza. And I think it is not in the interest of any of those countries to be accused of providing Israel with any help to continue this war of genocide that has killed too many Palestinians and that unfortunately today is continuing to kill, because today 20 Palestinians died of starvation. And let me conclude with that and to remind that the Gaza territory is smaller than the city of Johannesburg. We have 2.2 million Palestinians living in 320 square kilometers, and Israel up to date dropped 100,000 tons of bomb over Gaza. This is equal to 6 times the nuclear bomb dropped in Hiroshima during the Second World War.
Ambassador, I have to stop you there because we are running out of time. Absolute pleasure having you on. Shukran so much for joining us. Ma'as-salama.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
That is Ambassador Adel Atieh. He's the Director of the European Affairs Department for the State of Palestine. He also serves as Palestine's ambassador to the European Union. Well, that's all we have for you here on Talking Point. If you've missed this episode, be sure to catch it on our YouTube channel. From myself, Faraz Patel, and the team that brought you this beautiful set that we have today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.